Now, the Palestinians want our support at the UN for an independent state. Should we give it to them, or will that lead to more violence? After nearly 2 decades of a failed peace process, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas brought his people's case to the United Nations.
The goal of the Palestinian people is the realization of their inalienable national rights and their independent state of Palestine.
He wants the UN to recognise Palestine based on its 1967 borders, the West Bank, including Jerusalem, and the Gaza Strip. And he wants full membership of the UN. Tomorrow, the Security Council, including the UK, will consider his demands. The US has said it will veto his claim, and the UK will probably abstain. The Israelis say recognising a Palestinian state would encourage terrorist attacks. They believe the Palestinian government still wants to destroy the Israeli state, and they see this latest attempt as a barrier to peace.
The truth is that we cannot achieve peace through UN resolutions, but only through direct negotiations between the parties.
But the Palestinians say a vote recognising their rights as a state could help kickstart peace negotiations and put political pressure on Israel to stop settling on Palestinian land. So, should we give our support to their bid?
Your friends in Britain and in France will stand with you as you build your democracy and build your country for the future. Thank you very much.
After all, we've encouraged other recent uprisings and the growth of democracy across the Middle East. Or would supporting Palestine be an empty and dangerous gesture, making peace in the Middle East even harder to reach? Well, if you have a webcam, you can make your point on Skype this morning. You can join the conversation on Twitter, phone, text or email. The details are all on the screen. We're joined by George Galloway, a lifelong campaigner on Arab causes, and David Vance, an author and blogger who writes on terrorism. Welcome to the studio. George Galloway, should we recognise a Palestinian state?
Most people seem to think so. The number of people in the rejectionist camp is exceedingly small, so well done you for finding two to come up against me today. The vast majority of the countries in the United Nations say yes. It is, of course, 63 years since the United Nations actually did vote to partition the country and create a Palestinian state. 63 years on, there isn't one, and most people believe that it would serve the interests of stability in the region and peace in the world, not to mention justice, if the Palestinians could get at least a small part of their country back.
David Vance, are you just a lone voice against a sea of voices who say this is the right thing to do?
I don't think by any means I'm a lone voice. I also think the question is fundamentally incomplete. You ask, should we recognise a Palestinian state? The bit that's missing is the bit that follows. A Palestinian state whose most likely next leader, Mahmoud Abbas, stood up at the United Nations on Friday and declared that that state would not recognise the Jewish state of Israel. So, on what basis would the UK seek to recognise a state which has said if we are granted statehood, we're not going to recognise our neighbour? In what way, Susanna, does that lead to peace and reconciliation?
George, can you,
sure,
Milo, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but George, can I just ask you the question? Do we recognise a state which finds it hard to recognise its neighbour?
Well, that's completely false, you see, and David wouldn't want to mislead the viewers. What Mahmoud Abbas, the most moderate possible Palestinian leader, by the way, said was that he would not recognise Israel as a Jewish state. Not that he would not recognise Israel. Israel was recognised by the Palestinians at the Oslo signing ceremony on the White House lawn. And the reason he can't recognise it as a Jewish state is because more than 1 million Palestinian Christians and Muslims live in it.
Milo,
that's not the reason he doesn't recognise it as a Jewish state, and the fact is that it is a Jewish state, and it's not true when you say that everybody accepts that it's going to contribute to stability in the region. Quite the reverse. Everybody is saying the only route to peace is negotiations, long, arduous, painful peace negotiations. And this unilateral action, which violates many of the agreements already made between the Palestinian authorities and Israel, can only derail that process.
And there is actually a broader point to that, Susanna, if I may say, because if we look at what happened in 2005, when Israel vacated Gaza so that it could be Jew-free as the Palestinians wanted. They got Gaza. What happened within a year? Fatah fell, Hamas came to power, and in those intervening years, we've seen Gaza become little more than an area for terrorism to operate against Israel.
So your argument is that, that Palestine should not be recognised as a state because it wouldn't be able to control itself as a state.
We've seen precisely what happens, Susanna, when Palestinians are given autonomy. What they do is...
Savages, really.
If you let me finish, George.
Yeah,
let me finish, George. Let me finish, George, please.
No, but hang on, let's let David say what he's going to say.
Yes, I'm actually quite able to say what I believe. What I believe is that the Palestinians in Gaza have demonstrated their total unsuitability to be given any degree of autonomy. As the dead bodies in Israel represent, as the thousands of...
You want to talk about dead bodies? You want to compare dead bodies, the number of Palestinian dead bodies with the number of Israeli dead bodies? This is monstrous, even for a Sunday morning.
No, George, what you're saying is monstrous.
Thesis that's
George,
just
I don't
been
want
outlined.
to compare dead bodies, but what I do want to ask is the point that David makes about what a Palestinian state might be like.
Susanna, what I kind of meant when I said everybody except these two and a very few others agree is that George Bush agreed, that Tony Blair agreed, that David Cameron agrees, that the European Union agrees, that the Quartet agrees, that the vast majority of countries in the United Nations agree, that the Palestinians are not subhumans and that they are entitled to a state and they would be able to run one. But you have managed to find, this is the only room in Britain where 2 out of the 3 people discussing this matter are supporters of Netanyahu.
Listen,
so as I say again, well done you. Well done.
I don't want to argue just in this room because there are people we can talk to who have direct experience of what this might mean for them. And let's go to them now. Issa Amro is a Palestinian community worker and joins us on a webcam from Palestine. Why should we support the call for recognition and membership at the United Nations, Issa?
Yes, I would like to say something very important, that all the Palestinian youth deserve a country and we deserve a state. We were suffering since 20 years of endless negotiation and the Israeli government didn't give us anything. Something very important that, in the same time we are talking about violence, the settlements have been increased and tripled. The number of settlers were tripled in West Bank since the beginning of the negotiation. The settlers are controlling 42% of the West Bank. As a Palestinian, I want to live in peace as anybody else in the world. I want to tell David, we don't have Palestinian forces occupying Tel Aviv. It's the Israeli army who's occupying Hebron and occupying West Bank. My daily life is horrible. Your daily life is nice. The settlers are attacking our houses. All the violence which is happening since 3 years, the majority of violence was coming from settlers.
Issa, can I interrupt? And I appreciate what you're saying. I just want to ask you a direct question, which is, what difference would it make if this move goes ahead, if there is recognition for the Palestinian state? What difference would that make to you on the ground?
It's a big difference for me. The land won't be distributed land. It will be the Palestinian land. And it will, I will tell my kids that, they have a state. It's about our future. We are just keep negotiating without, giving us a state. So what's the meaning of the negotiation? And it's about ending the occupation. It's not about attacking Israel. I want to feel that, we have a state as everybody else. I want to feel safe. I want to go from Ramallah to Hebron without a checkpoint. I don't want an Israeli soldier control when I go to pray in the mosque or when I go to pray in Jerusalem. Why the Israelis, they don't want us to have a state? Okay, this is something very, very important.
Well, let's talk to Mayor Shal Goldstein, who is mayor of Gush Etzion, a group of southern West Bank settlements. Why do you disagree with Issa, Mayor Goldstein?
First of all, as it was said before, we made a trial. Israel got out of Gaza Strip against my opinion, and instead of building a state, a democracy, a free state as they are intended to do, they're throwing missiles all the time on Israel. 100% of Gaza is free of Jews, just like they want. Judenrein, no Jews at all. Only one Jew, by the way, Gilad Shalit, was kidnapped. And all the time sending missiles and terror, first of all. Second of all, After Oslo Accord, there was not a single roadblock. All the roadblocks came after the suicide bombers and terrorist attacks against Jews. Before that, we didn't have any roadblock. It's lies. Nobody's justifying that. Another point. Israel is the only country in the world, I think, with guards in any kindergarten, in any supermarket, in any cinema. Because of what? Because of terrorists, Arab terrorists, who are trying to explode innocent people. Every bus with people who guard the buses. It's unusual. It's unacceptable. And that claiming that we are hunting them, come on.
Mayor Goldstein, I want to, Issa was keen to come back at you on that one, and I want to allow him to respond. Issa.
The day before yesterday, a Palestinian was killed, you know, by the Israeli forces. Why you don't talk about it, you know? When was the last violence occurred against Israel?
Were killed by stones.
You know, the Palestinian Authority is doing well by, you know, to control violence. Okay. We are calling for non-violence, and you are talking about us now.
This is it's not going to help if we talk over each other. Mayor Goldstein, I just want to put this point to you. What if recognition of a Palestinian state actually helped and created a better situation where two states respected each other? Is that a possibility in your view?
I have to say many comments on that. But peace, you don't make in agreements. Peace, you don't make in papers. Peace, you are making with people. And when the leader of the Palestinians are coming next to my community and saying to his complete followers, listen, on this hill, there will be no Jews in the future. No Jews. It's only a matter of time. And he's saying loud and clear, I will never recognize a Jewish state.
Okay,
and in my country, there will be 0 Jews. What can you tell by racism? And this is from the educational system. This is in the Palestinian TV. They're educating to kill us. So what kind of peace are you expecting to do?
Okay, Professor.
In my area.
Okay, Mayor Goldstein, thank you. I want to talk to Professor Chaim Brashith, who is an Israeli pro-Palestinian activist and filmmaker. We've heard there very directly the anger on both sides and the resistance on both sides in this argument. If a Palestinian state was recognized, what would happen?
Well, immediately nothing will happen because Israel is holding basically full control of all of Palestine. Even over Gaza, of course, they hold full control, though they have left it in 2005. And we remember in 2008-9 the incursion into Gaza and the killing of about 1,500 people who didn't do anything wrong. So basically, the day after, nothing will happen. And that is also a problem. But what the world is now doing, most states in the world and most people in the world are supporting Palestine, is evidence of the right and the logic of Abbas's demands that after 63 years of the UN doing nothing to actually put into operation Resolution 181, he's asking them to do something. I don't think this will happen because the United States and Israel will make sure it doesn't. And they will veto it. I mean, the United States will veto it in the Security Council.
Okay.
So in a sense, the result will be a great anger in Palestine, in the Arab world, and in other countries. But the actual realities on the ground are not likely to change.
Okay, Professor Brashith, thank you. David and Milo, I want to ask about the fact that we saw in our report earlier the celebration of the Arab Spring and the rise of democracy in countries like Libya. But Palestinians still arguing that that is denied to them. Is there a kind of a hypocrisy going on here?
Well, I think there may be a hypocrisy in labelling what's happening in those sort of Middle Eastern countries an Arab Spring. Some might say it as an Islamic reawakening, Susanna. So that's the first point. In terms of when we see what's happening in...
That's not how David Cameron has described it.
Well, David Cameron doesn't speak for me. I'm entitled to my opinion. From what I've seen in Egypt, For example, we've seen the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, which has some very sinister overtones. So I think before we do a little dance of celebration for the so-called democratization of these countries, we need to be very careful that we're dealing with the right facts.
Milo, why do we have to talk about this as being the end of peace negotiations when Mahmoud Abbas has not indicated that that's what he's trying to achieve?
Well, it's not up to him. Peace negotiations are a two-way process, and you can't expect to repeatedly violate terms that you have agreed. You can't expect to repeatedly go back on agreements you have made and expect the other party to welcome that and to put up with it. Now, the reality is, 2000, Israel made a very wide-reaching offer, and Arafat dismissed it out of hand. 2008, the same thing happened, and Abbas didn't even respond. You know, Israel's been putting up with these transgressions for quite a long time, and you can't keep doing this. I think that a unilateral action, like going to the UN for a resolution, and let's be clear, UN resolutions invariably make things worse, not better. Going and achieving some sort of unilateral declaration like that is in violation of the spirit and the letter of so many agreements.
Well, I want to, on the UN particularly, George Galloway, as we've heard from the contributors, the UN, in some cases, people would say, has not been the right place to pursue some of these aims.
Well, the UN, of course, brought Israel into being. There would be no Israel if it hadn't been for a United Nations resolution.
No, it didn't.
What do you mean, no, it didn't?
Israel's been in existence long before the UN brought it into being,
George. I know it's Sunday morning, but let's leave the
facts behind us.
Let's leave the Christian obscurantism to one side. The State of Israel was created in 1948 by a United Nations resolutions. That's a legal fact. We can discuss the Bible another time, David. Now, 63 years later, the Palestinian state, which was supposed to come into being on the same day that the State of Israel did, we're asking, and the vast majority of countries are agreeing, that a much smaller Palestinian entity should be recognized. Now, you can make your own mind up. You can back the man you called the mayor 5 times, who's actually an illegal occupier of someone else's land in breach of all international law.
Is Mahmoud Abbas after his land?
It's not his land. The British government, the American government, the international legal
Abbas
system.
After land that he thinks is his?
But he's not entitled to think it's his. He's an illegal occupier, and you kept calling him mayor. Now, you can back him. You can back the Christian obscurantism of David.
Or you could back,
the neocon fanaticism of Milo. Or you could be with the rest of the world. Now,
and back the Holocaust denier Abbas, George. How about we do that?
Well, George is very good friends with some of the most...
Most people in Britain want a solution that will end 63 years of a suppurating sore that has poisoned international affairs. Most people want that. It's not representative in this discussion, with an illegal settlement mayor and 2 cranks from the far right.
As opposed to a crank from the far left.
Unfortunately, I must leave it, but invite people to continue the discussion on our website. And the issue will be debated at the UN Security Council tomorrow.